Okay guys, so here we have our first of a couple videos in this time period on England, and today we'll talk about how we got from Parliament to the reign of probably the most famous and most successful of all the English monarchs, Elizabeth I. So how did this Parliament thing get created? It's going to play a big role in the change of England during the 1415, 1715 time period. So we got to establish how it actually got there. And it kind of got there initially informally. William I, the of Normandy, used a council of nobles as his advisors before he would pass laws, and that kind of became the way things were done for about, I don't know, about 200 years. And then we had the famous King John, as you see here on the left, and he doesn't, I mean, doesn't even look like a good king. It just looks bad, and I don't even know where his other hand is. He's holding up some like toy castle. But he was terrible, and as we all well know, he did write, or he didn't write it, but under him in 1215, you had the creation of the Magna Carta. Now, really, the Magna Carta was a way that nobles could try to check the power of a crappy king. It didn't put anybody new in power. Again, I often think it's a bit of an overrated document, but that's me. However, the key thing of what happened is that the king was not allowed to increase taxes without permission from the tenants-in-chief, or the kind of high nobles. Now, again, that means that he can't tax the nobility without their permission. And so what happened, if he had to increase taxes, he being the king, the nobles would get together kind of in a group so that they could talk about whether or not they could deal with it. And in 1236, about 21 years later, they started to meet as a group. And what Parliament was then used for was kind of dealing with the money. Initially, they only meet when the king calls them together. Each county would be represented by two people, normally bishops or nobles, and slowly but surely they'll gain some powers. They'll be able to approve certain types of laws. By the 1320s, they develop into two houses: the House of Commons, which was for regular or common people, and that was made up of knights and local officials like minor nobles, and then the House of Lords, which was more directly to advise the king. At one point, actually, they deposed King Edward II because he tried to do too much with money without their permission. And basically, the whole idea, what comes by, say, the 1400s, is you tell if you have a powerful king or not if he can either deal with or kind of abuse Parliament, and we'll see how that works. Now, that eventually will happen, and then you get King Henry VI coming to power. He was a very weak king. He was from the House of Lancaster, and he really can't control the feudal lords, and they're actually get so messed up that the feudal lords start kidnapping members of the House of Parliament so that they can't pass or approve laws anymore, and in a way that these guys are trying to like go back to feudalism, which of course William started to get rid of. Unfortunately, when that happens, um, the economy starts to suffer, and really in the end, the biggest problem for Henry VI, and from some of the writing that we have, it's clear that he probably had some type of mental illness, maybe depression, things along that line. He just wasn't really suited to be the king. So what ends up happening is that his cousin, Richard, the Duke of York, will rebel and claim the throne based on Henry's inability to actually do anything with it. Um, and Henry was of the House of Lancaster, who had actually seized the throne from their cousins, the Dukes of York's, many years before. So here, the Duke of York is seeing a nice opportunity to try to get back at Lancaster. He is successful in pushing out Henry, but he dies in the process. So his son, Edward IV, will seize power. But That's going to result in a civil war because whereas some people were okay with Richard, they really didn't like Edward. And what you have is a bit of a civil war, even though it's not officially called a civil war, in which is called the War of the Roses, mainly because it doesn't involve all of England. It's just two houses trying to get to become the king. So it's really called a dynastic war. Basically, you have the House of the Lancasters, which is the White Rose, versus the House of York, which is the Red Rose. Early on, the Yorkists were doing very well, but then Edward IV dies, natural causes, and he is succeeded by his brother Richard III, who Shakespeare wrote plays about, mainly because there's evidence that he took Edward's two sons to the house, to the Tower of London and murdered them so he could have the throne. And of course, supposedly the Tower of London is haunted by them. I don't know, I've never been there, but nonetheless, it's a pretty horrible story. Now, in the end, a very bizarre kind of thing happens in which at the Battle of Bosworth, the Lancastrians, who now are led or by their general Henry Tudor, are able to have victory at the main Battle of Bosworth, in which Richard is killed. Now, a new twist happens on this. There weren't any main Lancastrians to actually take the throne, and so what happens is that Henry will marry the daughter of Richard so can become the king, and so in the end, neither a Lancastrian nor a Tudor gets the throne, or a Lancastrian or a York gets the throne, it's the Tudors. And the Tudors are a very, very famous group of people. Henry becomes Henry VII, and he basically establishes the dynasty. Then we go into Henry VII, that's the picture right here. Then we go to Henry VIII. We've been there, we've done that, we know what he did. And after his death, he did get his son, Edward VI. Edward VI was actually a remarkable king. He was actually a young boy. You see him over here, still looking fabulous. He ruled from 1546 to 1553. He only lived for 16 years. From the age of 9 to 16, he was very kind of sickly all the time. He actually ended up dying of tuberculosis. But as a 9-year-old to 16-year-old king, he was kind of awesome. He was a very good king. He really focuses on art and literature. He continues with exploration, which is going to be a big deal. Under him, the Book of Common Prayer is published, and kind of really the way that Anglicanism was going to work was established by him. Um, and it was really, really impressive. I mean, this king was a legit guy. It was just sad that he died at such a young age. Now, he would be succeeded by his sister, Mary, who ruled from 1553 to 1558, also known as Bloody Mary, because yes, she had people killed. She had been exiled under her dad, Henry VIII, because he wanted to kill her because she was a Catholic. She does come back, and during her return, she wanted to re-establish Catholicism, and that's what she really focused on. She persecuted many Protestants. She actually kills many, hence the Bloody Mary, and you see on the video here, Protestants being burnt, never fun. She also married Philip of Spain, but in a very sad way. We read a lot about how she was, in many ways, a depressed woman because she was unable to bear children. She got pregnant a couple times, had miscarriages, and unfortunately, obviously, had something wrong that she was unable to carry a child to term, which actually impacted her quite a bit and made her very depressed. Now, the depression is no way to excuse what she did to the Protestants, but a lot of people felt that's kind of what actually ended up driving her. In the end, she dies either of tuberculosis like her brother or influenza, but nonetheless, after her will come the greatest of all the English monarchs, and that is Elizabeth I. As a young woman, had a very kind of dodgy life. Her sister was queen, and her sister did not like her. There is the one story that her sister had actually written up a death warrant, and it was at her bed She just died before she could sign it. We're not sure if that actually happened, but it is kind of interesting. Um, at one point, she does imprison Elizabeth in the Tower of London for a while, but in the end, Elizabeth still gets to become the queen. Of course, she's most notably known for being the quote-unquote virgin queen. No, not a virgin, but she just chose not to marry because no one was good enough. She was pretty incredible. She was great at working with Parliament. She was the one that was truly in charge, but she got their input. She allowed them certain powers. She kept up with representation, which was important, and as a result, she was a very beloved monarch because it seemed like, and I think when you look at the evidence, that she truly cared about her people, and she would pass laws that were very appropriate, and there were no internal problems during her reign. She was very big at, you know, being Protestant. Of course, she was excommunicated, not that she really cared. One pope actually declared that he wanted her to get assassinated, and of course, we know the whole deal with Philip and how all that went down. Now, she did have some threats that she did have to deal with. One was her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, who technically was in line for the throne if she were to die, and as a result, her son James was in line for the throne. So, what she ended up doing was actually taking James from her mother to raise him as a Protestant. It wouldn't work real well. Mary, in turn, then tries to marry um, Philip as well, which was very, very interesting, um, and tried to ally with the Pope. So, in the end, Elizabeth responds by capturing her and then later executing her. And then we know on the heels of that came the Spanish Armada, but that didn't work out well for them. I didn't say she was always nice, but she got it done. Now, the impact of Elizabeth is really profound. First and foremost, also, you had her dealing with religion, and the major issue she actually had was dealing with the Puritans. Many of them did not like her. They actually protested her coming to power because they did not believe women should have power, so she would really put a lot of pressure on them, which subsequently, under her uh, nephew, if you will, really her cousin James, who would be her successor, they're encouraged to leave and will have a role in founding our country. Very big on the arts, Marlowe, Shakespeare, the theater, art and architecture. This is the golden age of English literature, and that's because Elizabeth liked it and encouraged people to do it. Exploration, of course, really would go on as well. Of course, Virginia, named after her, the Virgin Queen. She also would focus on economics and really doing all she could to encourage trade. We'll be talking about this as well in our next section when we get to the Age of Exploration and stuff like that. But Elizabeth put everybody in the forefront, and what she really did was make England England. Everybody rallied behind her, that they were proud to be English, and they wanted to be English, and they wanted to do things for the glory of England. And you get science and trade and all of this stuff, and it is really because of the reign of Elizabeth that England would accomplish all of the things that it did, because she unified it. Yes, there would be a civil war after her, and that's okay, but she put England in the driver's seat, and she did it all by herself. Really, really an incredible woman. All right, guys, we'll talk about more about this tomorrow, so make sure you get your comments, questions, and I'll see you then.